What happens when a beloved Hollywood icon walks onto one of the most unpredictable live stages on television and finds himself face to face with a host who refuses to hold back? The lights come up. The applause begins before he even appears. And in that brief, electric moment between anticipation and reality, something in the air feels different. Before we dive into this explosive moment, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, hit that like button, and drop a comment below. Because stories like this, they only get more intense from here. The camera sweeps across the studio audience, catching wide smiles, excited whispers, phones discreetly raised despite the rules. Everyone knows who's coming out. Everyone has expectations. Charm, humor, maybe a few laughs. That's how these segments usually go. But usually is about to be shattered. From backstage, Chris Evans exhales slowly, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for something more than just an interview. He's done hundreds of these. Red carpets, press tours, late-night banter. He knows the rhythm. He knows how to read a room. Still, something nags at him. A producer had leaned in moments earlier, voice low, smile tight. Just be ready. It might get a little spirited. Spirited. He almost laughs now, stepping toward the stage as his name is announced. The crowd erupts. He flashes that familiar smile, the one audiences trust, the one that says everything's going to be okay. But his eyes flick, just briefly, toward the table. Whoopi Goldberg is already watching him. Not smiling, not unfriendly, just steady, observing, measuring. Chris walks out, waving, shaking hands, exchanging quick greetings with the other hosts. Laughter fills the room, but it feels slightly offbeat, like a band just barely missing the tempo. He takes his seat. The music fades, and for a moment, everything is perfectly normal. Chris Evans is here, everybody. One of the co-hosts beams, clapping as the audience cheers again. Chris leans forward, relaxed. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me. The conversation starts light. His latest project, a few behind-the-scenes stories, some self-deprecating humor that lands exactly as expected. The audience laughs. The hosts nod. It's smooth, polished, safe. But Whoopi hasn't said much yet. She's listening. And then she leans in. So, she begins, her voice calm but carrying weight. You've been pretty vocal lately. About a lot of things. The shift is subtle. But it lands. Chris pauses, just for a fraction of a second. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough. I try to be, he says carefully. I think it's important to. Important to what? Whoopi cuts in, not aggressively, but directly. Speak out. Or be heard. The audience quiets. It's not silence, exactly. More like the sound has been pulled back. Chris smiles again, but this one is different. Smaller. More deliberate. I think those two things go hand in hand, he replies. When you have a platform, you use it, Whoopi finishes. Right. But here's the thing. Not everybody agrees on how that platform should be used. A murmur ripples through the audience. Chris shifts slightly in his seat. His posture remains open, but his fingers tighten together just out of view. I wouldn't expect everyone to agree, he says. That's kind of the point of conversation. Whoopi nods slowly. But conversation, she says, usually involves listening too. There it is. Not loud. Not explosive, but unmistakable. The other hosts glance at each other. One of them tries to interject lightly. And we love a good conversation here. But the moment has already taken shape. Chris leans back a little, considering. I do listen, he says. I try to understand different perspectives. Whoopi tilts her head. Do you? She asks. The question hangs. It's not accusatory in tone, but it lands like one anyway. The audience shifts again. Someone coughs. A chair creaks. Chris lets out a quiet breath, his smile fading just a notch. I mean, I'm human, he admits. I don't always get it right. But I try. Whoopi studies him for a second longer than is comfortable for live television. Then she nods. Okay, she says. But the way she says it doesn't feel like agreement. It feels like a door opening. And now the conversation is no longer about movies. A co-host jumps in, sensing the tension. Let's talk about your new film. But Whoopi raises a hand, gently but firmly. Actually, she says, eyes still on Chris, I want to stay here for a second. The audience reacts, some intrigued, some uneasy. Chris leans forward now, elbows on his knees, fully engaged. Sure, he says. There's no backing away now. Whoopi's voice softens, but her words sharpen. There are people, she says, who feel like when celebrities speak on serious issues, it can come off as disconnected. Like you're speaking at them, not with them. Chris nods slowly. I've heard that, he says. And what do you think about that? She presses. He hesitates. And in that hesitation, the room tightens. I think it depends on how it's done, he says finally. I try to speak from a place of care, not authority. Whoopi leans back slightly, folding her hands. But intention and impact aren't always the same thing, she says. There's a beat. A long one. Chris's jaw tightens just slightly. I agree, he says. But should that stop people from trying? Trying is good, Whoopi says. But listening is better. The words land harder this time. The audience reacts, some applause, some silence. Chris glances briefly toward the crowd, then back at Whoopi. And I do listen, he repeats more firmly now. Whoopi doesn't look away. Then listen to this, she says quietly. And suddenly, the air in the room changes again. It's no longer just an interview. It's a confrontation. Not loud, not chaotic, but deeply, unmistakably real. The other hosts are still now, watching the exchange unfold. The producers backstage are signaling, wrap it, shift it, move on. But something about this moment refuses to be redirected. Chris's expression has shifted completely. The easy charm is still there, but now it's layered with something else. Resolve. Okay, he says. I'm listening. And for the first time since the segment began, Whoopi smiles. Not a big smile. Not a friendly one. But a knowing one. Good, she says. Because what comes next is where everything changes. The smile lingers for only a second, but it changes everything. The room feels tighter now, like the walls themselves have leaned in to hear what comes next. Even the audience, moments ago full of energy and scattered applause, has settled into a quiet that feels almost anticipatory. Chris Evans doesn't move. He's still leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped, but his eyes are locked on Whoopi Goldberg now. Fully present. Fully aware. Good, she had said. And now she takes her time. That, more than anything, is what makes it intense. Because silence on live television? That's power. There are people out there, Whoopi begins slowly, her voice steady but deliberate, who don't feel heard. Not by politicians. Not by media. Not even by the people they see on screens every day. Chris nods once. Subtle. Controlled. And when someone like you speaks, she continues, they listen. Not because they agree, but because they're trying to figure out if you understand them. A faint murmur rolls through the audience. Chris shifts slightly, sitting upright now, his hands separating as if preparing to respond. But he doesn't interrupt. He's listening, just like he said he would. Whoopi notices. Her gaze softens for half a second, then sharpens again. So let me ask you something, she says. When you speak about these issues, who are you speaking for? There it is. Not a trap, but definitely a test. Chris inhales slowly, choosing his words with care. I don't think I can speak for anyone, he says. That's not my place. I can only speak from my own perspective, my own values. And what if your perspective doesn't match theirs? Whoopi asks immediately. Then I hope they challenge it, Chris replies. That's how we grow, right? The audience responds with a small wave of applause, but it's hesitant, unsure which direction this conversation is heading. Whoopi nods again, but there's a faint crease in her brow now. Growth is good, she says. But accountability matters too. Chris leans back slightly, crossing one leg over the other. His posture shifts, not defensive, but more grounded. I agree, he says. Completely. Do you? Whoopi presses. The question lands sharper this time. Chris doesn't smile now. No hesitation, he says calmly. Yes, I do. The temperature in the room rises, metaphorically but unmistakably. One of the co-hosts lets out a small, nervous laugh, trying again to ease things. This is getting deep today, but neither Chris nor Whoopi looks away. They're locked in, and everyone else can feel it. Whoopi leans forward now, mirroring Chris's earlier posture. Because from where some people sit, she says, her voice lower now, more personal, it can feel like celebrities step into conversations they don't fully understand, and then step out when it gets uncomfortable. A ripple of reaction moves through the audience, this one louder. Chris's expression tightens just slightly. That's fair, he says after a beat. There are definitely people who do that. And you? Whoopi asks. Direct. Unfiltered. Chris exhales through his nose, glancing down for the briefest moment before looking back up. I try not to, he says. I stay engaged. I keep learning. I keep showing up. Whoopi watches him carefully. Even when people push back, she asks. Chris nods. Especially then. There's a pause. And this time, it's Chris who lets the silence breathe. The audience is completely still now. Even the cameras seem quieter. Whoopi leans back slowly, her fingers tapping lightly against the table. Okay, she says again, but this time, there's something different in her tone. Less challenge. More curiosity. But here's where it gets tricky, she continues. Because sometimes people don't just push back. Sometimes they feel hurt. Chris's eyes flicker. That word lands differently. Hurt. And when that happens, Whoopi says, it's not about debate anymore. It's about impact. Chris nods slowly. I understand that, he says. Do you? She asks again, not loudly, but with precision. Chris leans forward once more, his voice quieter now, more measured. I've made mistakes, he says. I've said things that didn't land the way I intended. And when that happens, I try to own it. The audience responds, this time with more confident applause. Whoopi doesn't interrupt it. She lets it happen. Then she leans in again. But owning it isn't just saying I'm sorry, she says. It's changing. Chris meets her gaze without flinching. I agree, he says. Another beat. Another shift. Because now something is changing. Not in the tension, but in the energy beneath it. It's no longer just confrontation. It's something deeper. A co-host finally finds an opening. I think what we're seeing here is a real conversation. But Chris raises a hand slightly, not to cut her off, but to hold the moment. If I can say something, he adds. Whoopi gestures lightly. Go ahead. Chris takes a breath. And for the first time since he walked out, his voice carries something raw. I don't claim to have all the answers, he says. And I don't expect people to agree with me. But I do care. A lot. And I think sometimes that gets lost. The audience quiets again, but this time it feels different. More reflective. Less tense. Whoopi watches him closely. And why do you think that is? She asks. Chris pauses. Because this question? It's not about headlines. It's not about sound bites. It's about something deeper. I think, he says slowly, people see a public figure and assume distance. Privilege. Detachment. And sometimes they're right. A few heads in the audience nod. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to connect, he continues. It just means we have to try harder. Whoopi's expression softens, just a fraction. And how do you do that? She asks. Chris hesitates again. Not out of uncertainty, but out of honesty. I'm still figuring that out, he admits. That lands. Harder than any polished answer could. The audience reacts, not with applause this time, but with something quieter. Respect. Whoopi leans back, crossing her arms loosely. Fair answer, she says. But then she tilts her head slightly. And what happens, she adds, when figuring it out isn't enough for the people who expect more from you? And just like that, the tension surges back. Because now the question isn't about effort. It's about expectation. Chris's jaw tightens again, his eyes narrowing just slightly, not in anger, but in focus. That's the risk, he says. What risk? Whoopi asks. The risk of speaking at all, Chris replies. A ripple moves through the room. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. So you're saying it's risky to speak up? She asks. I'm saying it's complicated, Chris answers. Complicated doesn't mean you stop, Whoopi counters. I never said it did. The exchange sharpens. Faster now. More direct. Then what are you saying? She presses. Chris leans forward again, his voice firm. I'm saying that no matter what you say, someone will feel unheard, he says. But that doesn't mean you stay silent. It means you keep trying to do better. A beat. A long one. Whoopi studies him again. The audience is holding its breath now. Because this is no longer just a conversation. It's a collision of perspectives. And neither side is stepping away. Finally, Whoopi nods. Slowly. Deliberately. All right, she says. But the look in her eyes says something else entirely. Because this conversation, it's not winding down. It's building. And what comes next won't just challenge Chris Evans. It might redefine the entire moment. All right, she says. But this time, the word doesn't feel like a pause. It feels like a turning point. The studio lights seem harsher now, casting sharper shadows across the table. The energy that once floated lightly between jokes and applause has hardened into something far more focused. Something that demands attention. Chris Evans doesn't lean back this time. He stays exactly where he is, forward, engaged, locked in. Waiting. Because now he knows, this isn't just a conversation anymore. It's a line being drawn. Whoopi Goldberg exhales slowly, her fingers interlacing on the table as she studies him. Not like a host observing a guest, but like someone weighing something deeper. Let me take this a step further, she says, her voice calm but carrying a new edge. Because it's easy to talk about effort. It's easy to talk about trying. But people don't always judge you on effort. Chris nods once. They judge you on results, he finishes. Exactly, Whoopi replies. A murmur ripples through the audience again, louder this time, because now the stakes feel clearer. And sometimes, she continues, those results don't match the intention. And when that happens, people don't want explanations. They want accountability. Chris's expression tightens, not defensively, but with focus. And they deserve that, he says. Whoopi's eyes narrow slightly, not in disagreement, but in scrutiny. So where's the line? She asks. Between speaking out and speaking over? The question lands heavier than anything before it. Even the other hosts don't try to interrupt this time. Chris takes a breath. A real one. The kind that signals he knows this answer matters. I think the line moves, he says slowly. Depending on who you're talking to. Depending on what you're talking about. Whoopi tilts her head. So it's subjective? She asks. In part, Chris replies. Because people's experiences are different. Their realities are different. What feels like support to one person might feel like intrusion to another. The audience reacts, this time, with a mix of nods and quiet murmurs. Whoopi leans forward again. And how do you know the difference? She asks. Chris hesitates. And this time, the hesitation is longer. More visible. Sometimes, he admits, you don't. Not right away. There's a shift in the room. Because that answer? It's honest. But it's also risky. Whoopi doesn't let it sit for long. But that uncertainty, she says, doesn't protect the people who feel the impact. Chris's gaze sharpens. I know, he says. Do you? She presses again, this time with more weight than before. And now, something changes. Chris leans in closer, his voice dropping just slightly, but gaining intensity. Yes, he says. I do. The simplicity of it cuts through the room. No qualifiers. No softening. Just certainty. Whoopi studies him, her expression unreadable for a moment. And how? She asks. Not challenging. Not dismissive. Just direct. Chris exhales, running a hand briefly over his jaw before answering. Because I've had people tell me, he says. Directly. Honestly. Not always kindly, but truthfully. The audience listens closely now, leaning in almost collectively. And what did you do with that? Whoopi asks. Chris pauses again, but this time it's different. Less hesitation. More reflection. I listened, he says. Even when it was uncomfortable. A beat. Especially when it was uncomfortable. That lands. You can feel it. The audience responds, not with loud applause, but with something quieter. A ripple of acknowledgement. Whoopi nods slowly. That's something, she admits. And for the first time since this exchange began, there's a hint of something else in her tone. Respect. But it doesn't last long. Because she leans forward again, closer than before. But listening after the fact, she says, isn't the same as understanding before you speak. There it is. Another layer. Another push. Chris's jaw tightens again, his fingers pressing lightly against the table. That's true, he says. Then why not wait? Whoopi asks. The question hits like a sudden drop. The audience reacts immediately, some surprised murmurs, a few audible gasps. Wait, Chris repeats. Wait, Whoopi says, before stepping into conversations that don't belong to you. And just like that, the tension spikes, higher than it's been all segment. Chris leans back slightly now, not retreating, but recalibrating. And who decides what belongs to who? He asks. The question is calm, but it carries weight. Whoopi doesn't answer immediately. Instead, she lets the silence stretch, long enough for the audience to feel it. Then, the people living it, she says. A strong reaction from the crowd, applause, scattered but passionate. Chris nods slowly, absorbing it. I hear that, he says. But he starts. And the moment he does, Whoopi raises her hand slightly. Not to shut you down, she says quickly. But to be clear, this isn't about telling you to be silent. Chris watches her closely. It's about asking you to be aware, she continues, of when your voice helps and when it might overshadow. Chris leans forward again, his expression intense now, fully stripped of the earlier charm. I think about that, he says. All the time. Do you? Whoopi asks, one more time, but softer now. Chris nods. Yes, he says, because the last thing I want is to make things worse. A pause. A long one. Whoopi studies him carefully. And something shifts again. Not in the tension, but in the understanding beneath it. Then let me ask you this, she says, her voice quieter now. Why not use that platform to elevate other voices instead of your own? The question lands differently. Not as a challenge, but as an invitation. Chris blinks just once. Because that's a different conversation. I try to, he says. I share, I amplify. But you're still the one speaking, Whoopi interrupts gently. Chris stops. And for a moment, he doesn't have an answer. The silence that follows is heavier than anything before it. The audience feels it. The hosts feel it. Even the cameras seem to linger longer than usual. Chris looks down briefly, then back up. And when he speaks again, his voice is quieter, more honest than it's been all day. You're right, he says. The words hang in the air. Clear. Uncomplicated. Unexpected. Whoopi's expression changes, just slightly. Not surprise, but recognition. I can do more of that, Chris continues. I can do better at that. The audience responds, this time with stronger applause. Because now, this isn't just tension. It's transformation. But Whoopi doesn't let the moment settle completely. Because she leans back, her eyes still locked on his. And will you? She asks. Not rhetorically. Not casually. But with weight. Chris doesn't hesitate this time. Yes, he says. A beat. Then another. And for the first time since the segment began, Whoopi nods without questioning it. But just as the room begins to exhale, just as it feels like the storm might be passing, a voice from the audience cuts through the moment. Loud. Unscripted. Unplanned. But is that enough? The entire room freezes. Heads turn. Producers stiffen backstage. The hosts glance toward the source of the voice. And Chris? He looks out into the crowd, eyes narrowing slightly. Because this wasn't part of the show. And whatever comes next won't be controlled. The interruption slices through the studio like a sudden gust of wind. Chris Evans leans forward, scanning the crowd, his jaw tight, eyes flicking toward the source. The audience hushes instantly, tension crackling through the air. Every camera angle lingers, capturing the moment, the pause, the uncertainty, the electric anticipation of what will happen next. Live television has a way of turning small moments into seismic ones, and this is seismic. Whoopi Goldberg doesn't flinch. She sits back slightly, folding her hands, her gaze steady on Chris. There's no panic, no irritation, just the quiet authority of someone who knows exactly how to handle a live storm. Chris exhales, his fingers pressing lightly against the table. He's not just a celebrity here. He's a human being, facing a question that pierces the curated armor of press appearances and polished interviews. That's a fair question, he says, his voice measured but carrying a raw undercurrent of emotion. And I don't want to pretend that simply deciding to do better fixes everything. I've learned that words can matter, but actions matter more. And I'm willing to do the work, listening, learning, stepping back when necessary, and amplifying voices that need to be heard. The audience shifts, some leaning forward, some exhaling audibly. There's a collective sense that what's happening here is not just scripted conversation. It's truth being tested in real time. Whoopi nods slowly, letting the words settle. Good, she says, her voice calm but pointed. Because saying you'll try is easy. Actually doing it, that's the hard part. Chris leans back slightly, a small, almost self-deprecating smile tugging at his lips. I know, he admits. And I'm ready for the hard part. The room stays tense. Not awkward. Not hostile. But the kind of tension that comes from watching a public figure stripped down to their most human form. Vulnerable. Accountable. Real. A co-host breaks the pause lightly, trying to ease the room back into levity. Well, Chris, it seems like this has been a very enlightening conversation. Chris chuckles softly, but it's not forced. It's the sound of someone who's just been challenged and accepted it. Whoopi leans in, her expression now softening for the first time in the segment. Enlightening, yes, she says. But also a reminder that the work doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling. Chris nods, eyes meeting hers fully. Absolutely. And I'll keep showing up. Not for the headlines. Not for the applause. But for the conversations that matter. The audience begins to applaud. Tentatively at first, then with more energy. The realization of what they've witnessed is settling in. A live confrontation turned into a dialogue of accountability and reflection. Phones capture the moment. Clips start circulating in real time on social media, and the energy of authenticity is palpable. The other hosts smile, some relieved, some inspired. Even the producers, who had been signaling to move the segment along, seem stunned at how powerful the exchange has been. Chris glances at Whoopi, a mixture of respect and gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he says sincerely. She nods, a rare smile crossing her face. "Keep it up," she replies. "The audience and the world will notice when you do." The camera pans across the studio, catching the faces of the audience. Many are smiling, some wiping away small tears, others whispering to neighbors about the intensity of what just unfolded. The energy is palpable, almost tangible, a collective acknowledgement that something significant just happened. As the segment winds down, Chris stands, waving to the audience, the earlier tension replaced by a quiet resolve. Whoopi sits back, composed, the authority and presence she's known for radiating from every line of her face. And outside the studio, the fallout begins immediately. Social media explodes. Clips of the confrontation, the tough questions, and Chris's honest responses circulate widely. Headlines emerge. Chris Evans confronted Live by Whoopi Goldberg, and he didn't flinch. Celebrity accountability in real time. Chris Evans versus Whoopi Goldberg, The View's most honest moment in years. Fans and critics alike debate, dissect, and discuss, sharing opinions, praise, and critiques. Chris's name trends. Whoopi's commentary dominates recaps. Analysts break down every word, every pause, every gesture. And through it all, the core message resonates. Dialogue matters, accountability matters, and the courage to confront truth publicly can spark reflection far beyond a single studio stage. Back in the studio, Chris and Whoopi exchange a final nod. A silent acknowledgement that this moment, raw and unfiltered, has created a ripple far bigger than either could have predicted. And now, as the cameras fade, the lights dim, and the credits roll, one thing is certain. The conversation isn't over. It's just begun. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of this intense exchange? And don't forget to subscribe to Stage View for more explosive, dramatic stories that put you right inside the moment, where every word, every glance, and every pause matters. Because moments like this, they don't just make headlines, they make history.